We haven't had rain in quite a while. We are at the peak of the dry season at the moment. And yeah, things are getting very dusty. There's very little moisture in many places of the soil. There are no natural springs or any springs on the property, no flowing water. We are on a mountain. It is rocky. The soil doesn't really hold moisture. And in spite of all this, I do not irrigate. And I'm going to tell you why. This is the time of year when many plants are wilting. Bananas are failing to thrive, yellowing in the leaves. And so how do we cope with this? How do we grow food in places like this where the soil, I mean, here's the rock. There's the soil. We got a cross section of the mountain. It's mostly a volcanoclastic, rock dominant soil. A shovel is useless on this property. You need a pickaxe if you want to plant any trees. So what are the strategies that we use to grow food in a place such as this? Now, what do I mean when I say I don't irrigate? Well, what I mean is all I will ever use to water plants is a little bit of gray water from my kitchen sink. And I've got a cistern that collects some runoff off of our green roof. And I'll fill up small buckets and water individual plants from time to time. But I do not pipe any water. I do not have any drip systems. I do not have water reserved exclusively for plants, except I don't drink that water that comes off of our green roof. So you might say that's exclusively for plants, but we do not build any infrastructure for irrigation. So again, how do we manage to grow food in a place like this? Well, let's address point number one. Point number one, here we've got some Spanish thyme or Cuban oregano. Point number one is we grow plants that are simply adapted to drier seasons. So here we've got a very wet season and we've got a very dry season. And so things like this Cuban oregano, it's a succulent mint. So if I plant peppermint, every single time it dies. Once we get a dry spell, it dies back because our soil doesn't hold the moisture yet. So, but things like this Spanish thyme or Cuban oregano, Plectranthus ambionicus, will grow in spite of the difficulties. Another one is this hyacinth bean. Let me go take a look at another hyacinth bean. That one's kind of small. Here's a hyacinth bean worth filming. So this hyacinth bean, you can see it producing beans up there, is a drought-adapted bean that grows into this massive vine, can completely cover, here it's covering some pigeon peas, another very drought-tolerant legume. And in its season, it'll produce these beans. And these are crops that have deep tap roots. And pigeon peas have even been demonstrated to pull up water from deep down and share it amongst nearby plants in experimental cases such as corn, something that's not very drought adapted. Back here we've got a soursop tree. Soursop trees will grow wild here. They are another one of the ones, they've got a very waxy leaf, which helps them stay adapted. What else do we have? We've got avocados that start up from seed. They love well-draining soil and are completely fine with drier conditions. And some of our primary carbohydrates come from things like this yam vine that's growing up. Yams are one of the starch crops that they grow during the wet season, and then they die back during the dry season, putting their energy into a giant root underground that is stored energy that we dig up and eat and replant a chunk that will then start growing again when the wet season comes. So what's this yam vine doing growing into the dry season? Well, sometimes when they're brought in from other locations around the world, because they are time dependent on their germination, you can put this thing in a pot, water it, and it will not germinate until the correct time of year. So since they are time dependent on their germination, this one probably got trucked in from another part of the world and had already begun its germination process, but we'll give it a chance. Yams are very good at living on smaller amounts of water, depending on the variety, and so we use those. Let's take a look at another fruit plant. So right up here, we've got passion fruit coming in. Passion fruit, again, is another one of the very well site-adapted plants that we grow. And there are many, many more cases. I could take a great deal of time going over all the examples. But number one strategy is we grow site-adapted plants, such as these guavas, that, if left to their own devices, will grow on their own. And so as long as they don't die entirely, I'm okay if they grow a little slower, so long as they continue to grow. So that's why we have things like coconut and things like plantains and bananas, even though they're not perfect for this site, as long as the dry season does not kill them, we will plant them so that when the wet season comes, or if we get an abnormally wet year, they will grow and produce. Strategy number two is a bit more of a theoretical approach. Now, strategy number two is we educate and train our trees. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you put a plant inside in a light-starved environment, it grows very leggy. And what it's doing is it's reaching for the light. Now, you have to have enough light for it to grow, otherwise it will die. But what happens with the roots of a plant when it's starved of water? Now, you have to give it enough water that it doesn't die. Things like peppermint will die here, or spearmint, or any of those water lovers. Even things like taro, I've tried planting them. They just suffer no matter what I do. So most plants, if you give them just slightly less than the recommended amount of water that it wants, and it'll let you know by it'll start wilting, it trains its roots to go deeper down. And when its roots go deeper down, it's able to access water that is lower down. And when the rainy seasons come, which they do come, the water stays deeper down in the soil a little longer, even on well-draining soils like this. So having roots that go deeper and training your perennial bushes and trees to have those roots go deeper and deeper helps us stay afloat. Now, what happens oftentimes if you drip irrigate? Well, if you drip irrigate, all of the water is constantly coming through a little drip that's continuous at the surface of the ground. And so people who have farms with drip irrigation, all of the roots will be very close to the surface of the soil. Now, if it happens to be a hot day, as long as you've got your water, you're fine. But the moment you get a clog in your pipe or a busted pump or something goes wrong with the technology and the system, all of those roots that are near the surface of the ground desiccate, dry out, and the plants die. So now if we come on this way, we'll get across strategy number three. And strategy number three is a long-term strategy. If you watch the History Channel, all right, have you ever seen the History Channel? If you watch the History Channel, every now and then they'll do episodes on ancient civilizations. And some of these civilizations are very remote. And how do we know that civilizations existed in places like the Amazon jungle? Well, we know from LiDAR, which is a form of aerial mapping that scans the surface of the ground. And you can tell where people built mounds and excavated trenches, because those landscape features exist to this very day. Their houses are gone. Their trash is sometimes around in the form of pottery, but most of what they use day to day is likely gone. Their clothes are gone. All these things are gone, but the landscape features that they did remain. So when I say doing landscape features to catch water when it rains, spread it out and sink it down into the ground. So we're slowing, spreading, and sinking versus general advice being to get that storm water out of there. I love my storm water. I will hold on to every last drop of storm water that I can get. But we're on a mountain, so how do we do that? Let's check it out. Now here's one of our paths. The mountain goes up to the left. Our house is over straight ahead of us, behind all that stuff. I've got a kitchen over here. But when the rains come, water flows down this path. Now it used to flow down this path, go down the mountain, off to the road, and it would inundate a local creek, taking whatever nutrients and sediment along with it. But now what happens is it comes down, and it's hard to see because of this grass on the ground. I've got a little berm, which causes the water to come and then divert to the side. Now it's soaking in here, so these plants like the guava and the passion fruit, they're getting watered. But then the water takes a bit of a detour down. And if I zoom out, there's this large pit here that stores hundreds of gallons of water. And in the large rains, this whole thing will fill up. And we have such porous soil that it will drain out within a single day. But what happens if it overflows? Does it go down to the road? Well, it overflows here. And I come out during the rainstorms to watch, where does my water go? So it overflows here, goes back down the path, hits another berm, diverts again. And now our overflow water fills up another giant pit. And this pit too sinks the water hundreds of gallons in every large rainstorm into the soil. Now what happens when the water filtrates down into the soil? Well, it goes till it hits bedrock, and then it moves horizontally, and it moves downhill. Now right across from this pit, we've got an excavated trench that goes on contour along the hillside. And we use this excavated dirt to help fill in earth bags for our earth bag house construction. So it all went to use. But now water coming down the hillside overflows into this trench, whatever doesn't get absorbed by the grasses and plants on the hillside. Now this trench will fill up quite a way until it spills over here. When it spills over here, again, here we go. Comes across and it inundates this entire mulch pile, where when I want to clean around this plantain, I put all of the debris right there so that the water saturates that mulch pile. And look, in the midst of the dry season, remember that banana I showed you earlier? There it is. Now compare it to this guy. Has had no extra irrigation, but how beautiful it looks in the peak of the dry season. Now it's still a small guy, but we'll keep an eye on him as it goes. Now what's very interesting is, like I said, how the water percolates down into the ground until it hits bedrock. So we're going to go downhill here. Well, if that water goes down till it hits bedrock and goes sideways enough, it might eventually pop out of the ground. Now it can either do that in the form of a spring, or it can keep the ground moist. Now everywhere on this property, from the hilltops to the slopes, is bone dry at this point. In the top couple inches, definitely as far down as I'll dig. But right here, there's soil moisture. The only difference is just uphill from here, we've got those water catchment systems. Water moves slower below ground than it does on the surface. And so now we are passively irrigating this entire hillside, where before it would have just been bone dry. And this will continue to get better and better year after year for about 5 to 10 years, and we'll see it peak off and it'll level off how wet it'll get here. And so I'm planting coconuts, I've got jackfruit, I've got more yams, I've got soursop, passion fruit, mangoes. I'm planting this entire hillside, and I'm slowly planting more and more to take advantage of this water. Even things like rambutan are going on this hillside to take advantage of the passive water flow. So what's our next strategy, huh? You've already seen it, but you may not have noticed it. Our next strategy is right here. And this strategy is mulch. Now the mulch won't guarantee you moist soil year-round. In fact, underneath this mulch, it is dry. Doesn't bother things like this cocoa plum, so I can still grow fruit even throughout the dry season, but it does bother things like this sweet pepper. So, why do I mulch if it's clearly not working for these plants? Well, when it does rain, and it will, the mulch will hold on to that water for longer. It's like how it's cooler and moister in the shade compared to in the hot, blazing sun. Well, the same thing goes for the soil. And when you have a little bit of moisture longer in the soil microbes are decomposing that mulch, feeding your plants, and producing the conditions like increased carbon matter in the soil that can hold on to even more water on the next rain. And so we are fertilizing and banking our water at the same time by using mulch. So you know now why I don't use drip irrigation. Well, why don't I irrigate any other way? Well, to me, irrigation breeds dependence and it fosters unsustainability. So not only do you have to front the capital investment in the infrastructure, you also have to front the material investment. You know, those materials came from somewhere. Then you have to find a source of water. And many times this is unsustainably sourced groundwater. So we treat water like we treat oil. Drill, baby, drill. And so what else? Well, if I had irrigation, if I was hooked up to the local water grid, which there is one nearby, I could pump up as much water as I wanted and just pay $30 a month. Well, I could irrigate everything of mine. Well, that would also tax the local community because during the dry season, they can run low on water too. And it would get me to start planting more and more plants that require more and more water. So instead of using those plants that are adapted to my location, I would plant more taro. I would plant more bananas and more plantains, and I would rely on a lot of these crops. And it would lock me into an agreement that I'm going to be around to maintain and to irrigate. And I don't want to do that. I want to be able to travel when I want to travel, kick back when I want to kick back, and still have the system grow and produce for me. And I can't do that if I'm irrigating. So is irrigation right for you? Maybe. Honestly, I'm not making this video to say you shouldn't irrigate. I'm making this video to make it known to you what's possible without irrigating. Go outside and look around you. If things grow naturally, and look at the history of your location. You know, what was the place where you're living like 100, 200, 500 years ago? If it was green, like these mountains around me are green, well, then it doesn't matter how much rain you get a year, something will grow. And you need to tap into those natural systems that we can tweak a little bit, like through the landscape modification, to catch your water. Use it wisely and passively to grow your food. So again, I'm not telling you what you should or shouldn't do. I'm just letting you know what's possible. And maybe if more of us make positive choices to grow food with fewer and fewer inputs, if more of us do that, maybe we can make a better change on this world. I'll catch you guys in our next video. Feel free to support the work that my wife and I do here in Puerto Rico, providing food for the communities around us. And take care, guys. Thank you for all of our subscribers and everybody who comments in the comments section to get this video out to more people. Hope you've enjoyed. Hope you've learned something. I'll catch you guys in the next video.